Good afternoon to you on the East Coast. It's noon on the East Coast, and it's a little after 9 on the West. Happy Friday. Welcome to America in Context Live. I'm Andy Hirschfeld in New York. We have a lot to get to today, of course, on the coronavirus and the state of the economy. My guest joining me on this broadcast is Alex Mohajer. But first, let's get to the latest on the coronavirus pandemic. And it's not a good day, but then again, when has there been one? According to Johns Hopkins University, the current U.S. death count is almost 213,000 people. To put that in context, that's the equivalent of the population of Santa Clarita, California. Meanwhile, here in New York, where I am, facing an uptick in cases on the heels of the high holy days in the Jewish faith, hotspots have popped up in predominantly Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods. This comes on the heels of the president's recent diagnosis this week, which he claims he beat, which is just not possible. It's not true, and it's obviously not possible. The incubation period of the disease can be up to 14 days from exposure, and it hasn't been near that amount of time. It could get better, but regardless, dozens of members of the president's staff are sick as well. For whatever reason, public health is not the president's priority, and it's the economy. So Trump's role in the economy, we're going to be talking about that. Is his claims a reality or not so much? Well, it's time to fact check. Now it's time for a new segment we like to call Go Fact Yourself. I really, kudos to the graphics department for putting that lovely one together. For a guy whose claim to fame is that he bankrupted 6 companies and his most successful venture, a TV show, is when he fired people, it's rather bizarre that he claims he's the savior of the economy. He regularly lies about just about everything. The economy is no exception. His failures he blames for the Obama administration, and the successes of the Obama administration he takes credit for. But for you, the voter, you should know the objective truth. That's why joining me, the host of the AM Report, Alex Mohajer, is joining the program. Alex, thanks so much for joining me on this lovely Friday.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. A pleasure to be here and to help you tell Trump to go fact himself.
Well, the voters really should have a really objective understanding of the reality, and unfortunately, the stuff we've seen coming out of the right is that they can't even really, a lot of the time, come up with a biased interpretation of the facts. They either have to attribute something that isn't theirs to themselves, or just make things up to support their points. I think that's an important distinction also that has been lost a lot in how the GOP is covered. So from a marketing and branding standpoint, Republicans have really done a great job with the economy. At least that's what they're trying to make it sound like. But in the midst of the coronavirus, the U.S. has seen its biggest economic contraction ever and the highest unemployment rate in recent memory. It's true the economy has done well prior to the pandemic, continuing a trend which was actually started by the Obama administration, but there were periods that were also much stronger. So I kind of want to start by debunking things that really are not the crux of what's important specifically to the average American. But since Trump really builds his brand off of the GDP, the stock market, and the trade war, let's jump into that. So first, the GDP, under the Trump administration, how has the GDP really differed that much from the Obama administration?
Well, what we know is that the Trump administration inherited an economy that was really built brick by brick by the Obama administration following the Great Recession of the late 2000s, of the late aughts. And that was a period of slow growth, but we saw job creation and GDP growth under the Obama administration. And of course, the Trump administration inherited that. And the GDP has contracted by 1/3 since the outset of the coronavirus pandemic, and that's due in large part to the federal government's failure to respond to the coronavirus. And because of their continued failure to respond, the economy continues to suffer. And now the GDP contracting by 1/3 is one of the largest contractions, if not the largest, that we've ever seen. And that is extremely problematic. Donald Trump, however, doesn't seem to be aware that GDP is one of the indicators of the health of the economy. He views the thriving stock market as being what the indicators are for a healthy economy. And what we know is the stock market really is not an indicator of the health of the economy. It's how wealthy companies and corporations are how much wealth they're accumulating during the economy. So on the GDP, the Trump administration, especially right now, they benefited from an inherited trend of growth under the Obama administration, and since the outset of the coronavirus has squandered it.
Yeah, so just to be clear on that, during Trump's he's had an annual average of about 2.5% growth. This, of course, prior to the pandemic. The last 3 years of the Obama administration saw almost the exact same thing, 2.3%. And in fact, in mid 2014, the Obama administration had a 5.5% increase in the GDP coming out of the as part of the U.S.'s gross domestic product. But as you mentioned, the Trump administration likes to tout that the stock market is an indicator of the financial success of the country. But I also think it's important to point out that while it does play a role, it's not. The president does not actually have a super large amount of control on how the stock market performs. He can make it worse. Doing some of the crazy stuff he does, but you look at how companies perform, you look at global trade, even weather events that are impacting shipping and travel. So there's a whole slew of different things that can really impact how the markets react. So the president taking credit for that, or you're really taking blame for that, is really not entirely based in very much of anything. But so the markets really don't mean much, especially for people who are struggling to pay their rent right now. Let's take a look at the numbers of unemployment from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. Can we dive into that a little bit? What's your take?
Well, we now know that more people have filed unemployment under the Trump administration than actually voted for him, over 60 million people since the outset of the coronavirus pandemic. They've made a lot of bold claims, the Trump administration, particularly in this vice presidential debate with Mike Pence on earlier this week against Senator Kamala Harris about manufacturing jobs. And the claims were really dishonest. We're right now netting 164,000 losses in manufacturing jobs under the Trump administration. And we know that under the Obama administration, there were 900,000 manufacturing jobs created. And we know that about 4 million auto industry jobs were saved under the Obama administration because of their response to the Great Recession and their stimulus bill. So on jobs, again, just like with the GDP, the Trump administration's failure to adequately respond to the coronavirus pandemic has had economic implications, including job losses that they will not be able to fully recover until the virus is under control.
Well, also, to be fair on that, a lot of the jobs that have disappeared were on the way out anyways. And these trends are really exacerbated by the pandemic. A study that I actually referenced this a lot in my reporting, but there's a study commissioned by Edelman Intelligence in 2017 that said that the majority of Americans, especially in major cities, would be working as independent contractors and as freelancers. So a lot of the jobs, especially in white collar professions, we're already, additionally, if you're not, a C-suite executive, quite frankly, we're contracting, becoming smaller. There were fewer and far between. Wages have, continued to stagnate. Executives are making more, which, to be clear, that's not a new trend. That's been going on since like the 1980s. But if you're going to argue that you've really saved the economy, you have to, save those. That's part of that. And the wage of average workers have either stayed consistent with inflation or not even. So just the other thing I want to talk about is COVID-19 relief negotiations. Just this week, the president said that he's stalling them essentially until after the election, and that really opens up a lot of big questions. I mean, first of all, why? Like, what's the point of that? What's your take here?
Well, my take is that the president of the United States has COVID-19 and is taking medications that have severely compromised his cognitive ability. And that's just I'm not a medical expert, but I think that a lot of the bombast coming out of the president, especially with regards to this coronavirus relief package, which Americans need. The first coronavirus relief bill has run out. It's expired. People need more relief. We've had Republican senators say over my dead body to extending unemployment benefits when hundreds of thousands in their own state are unemployed. And so the Trump administration, talk about stock market futures, the speculation the day that he announced that there would be no coronavirus negotiations, the stock market dipped, and it was only after that the Trump administration started to say, "Oh, well, hey, let's actually renegotiate." So I think a lot of this is political posturing by the president, and I'm not sure what a lot of his logic is, but it's playing games with people's lives and livelihoods, and people need relief.
Well, something that struck me, actually, bring up this pivoting to the market thing. Trump went to Walter Reed last week to get care for the coronavirus, decided to leave the White House publicly right after the markets closed, really hoping to not stew that uncertainty. Like he's been really kind of religiously doing that kind of thing. Like that's really his most important indicator of the economy. So the other thing is I want to talk about some of the issues in regards to that COVID-19 or debunk some of those myths. First, House Democrats put up a relief bill in May, which Republicans have refused to move on. So this kind of idea, this concept, this language that I've seen recently that suggests that it's that there's some negotiations. Democrats have really been doing all of the negotiations and have really done a really terrible job of explaining that. What do you think is the kind of the communications issue there?
Democrats have never been good at the messaging front. I mean, most of the American people are convinced that Republicans are the ones to vote for if you believe in a strong economy, which is just, if you look at the trends, Republican presidents oversee economic retractions every single time over the last 30 years. And Democrats come in, fix it, create a thriving economy, and then Republican presidents come in and squander it. And that is a fact when you look at the trends over the last 30 years in terms of how the economy does under Democratic or Republican presidents. And that is because Republican administrations and policies tend to favor the rich and corporations, whereas Democratic policies favor the middle class and the worker. And that's generally speaking. So I think the messaging game has never been good with Democrats. I think Republicans are much stronger at coming in and weaving a narrative that it just simply isn't true. And I'll note that the Senate is now going to reconvene to railroad through the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett without voting on an economic relief stimulus package for the coronavirus pandemic, which really shows you where their priorities are. They are interested in pushing through ideological priorities and not the needs of the American people.
Well, one of the things I do want to point out is they've really hidden this in the messaging. Part of the coronavirus relief would be to help bail out municipal governments who have really struggled. This Mitch McConnell has suggested that cities and states, municipalities, file for bankruptcy. Now, the reason that I note this specifically is because Republicans have really been pushing back on blanketing Democrats entirely as saying defunding the police. So whether you agree with that or not is a separate conversation for another time. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not funding if you're not funding municipal governments, you're defunding the police, but you're not doing it for the valiant reasons that the Democratic leaders are doing it. You just don't want to pay for basic services. So I think it's important to point that out for people.
I think that's a really good point, Andy. And I'll note that when we learned this year that the President of the United States has only paid $750 in taxes over 2 years and zero in federal income taxes in 10 of the last 15 years, that means that the President of the United States supports defunding the police. Let's be very clear. He's not interested in paying for social services that people need. And when it comes to municipalities and local governments that need funding in order to survive, let's be clear about what that means. Right here in Los Angeles County, the County of Los Angeles is an employer to over 100,000 people. It's one of the largest government bodies in the United States. And without further economic relief for municipalities, that's going to mean more layoffs, that's going to mean more people in unemployment lines, and that's going to be more social services that are not able to be met for the people that live in those areas. So the local relief for municipalities and local governments is extremely important because they're being hit very hard. I know that Los Angeles County is facing massive layoffs coming up here if they don't get some sort of aid from the federal government. But yes, I to your point about defunding the police, I think it's very worthy to note that that they don't want to fund these programs, which is a shame. And also a quick note about defunding the police. It's a little bit of a misnomer. This is also a messaging problem that the Democrats and people who support that movement have not been clear about. That defunding the police is not about stripping funding, 100% of funding from police departments, and it's not an abolitionist movement. It's simply about taking some of the funding, exorbitant funding that's given to sheriffs and police departments, and reallocating it to social-based, community-based services and programs that are much better equipped to handle many of the issues that police are facing that they don't even want to be handling, like homelessness, like drug and alcohol abuse rehabilitation. So that's also something I just wanted to chime in and say.
Well, I think something, and not to editorialize here, but well, I'm going to do it anyways. But that some of the ways, just generally, that policing works is really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to practice law, the amount of schooling that you have to go through to practice law is years of school. Whereas if you're want to become a police officer, that can be as short as a 60-day course when you're in quote enforcing the law. So a lot of this stuff just objectively does not make anywhere near something resembling common sense. So I mean, not to get too in the weeds on the legalities here, because I do really want to focus on the economic impacts on this program. But there's just a lot of issues and contradictions there. So I want to get off that tangent, though. You mentioned the president's taxes, paid $750. People in poverty are paying higher taxes than that. The president claims that he's delivered the largest poverty reduction of any president in American history. In 2019, 4.2 million fewer people were living in poverty compared to the previous year. So it's factual that he's, lifted a lot of people out of poverty. That is a factual statement to give him credit there. But again, this is a Democratic messaging issue. Is that groundwork was laid by the Obama administration as a response to the economic downturn from the Bush administration, which, to go back further, is the budget under the Clinton administration was pretty strong. So, they're just digging out. They're just digging out a problem that the Bush administration, Obama was digging out a problem the Bush administration caused. It looks like we're losing Alex's signal there, which is not great. But so that's I guess something that we're gonna have to deal with right now. And well, hope we can get Alex's feedback up here. Alex, are you with us?
Can you hear and see me?
I hear you. I do not see you. But fortunately, we were about to wrap up. So, oh wait, well, that's live television for you. That is live television for you. Back to where we were there. Just to close out here, what policies do you think that voters should really keep in mind here when they're given a lot of people have already voted, what do you think voters should really keep in mind here if the economy is the most important topic for them when they head to the polls?
I think that the Trump administration has not demonstrated that they're able to protect us from the coronavirus. They failed to enact any sort of coordinated response in terms of keeping people safe. They can't even keep themselves safe. And because of that, the continued economic downturn will continue to stall. It will continue to turn down. Jobs will continue to be lost. In order to create new jobs and to turn this economy around, we've got to get a handle on the coronavirus. There are 210,000 dead Americans. There are 7 million infections, and there's no end in sight unless we have a national strategy. And that's going to be something that the Biden administration implements on day one. And that's when we can begin to save some jobs and create jobs. The other thing is that the Trump administration doesn't believe in climate science. They think that the climate change is a hoax. There are many green jobs that a pro-science administration that believes in climate change can be created, and new clean energy jobs are going to be crucial to an innovative new economy. I think that the Biden administration has signaled quite strongly that that's going to be their administration. So if you care about climate change and you care about creating new jobs and you care about the coronavirus, I think that it's time to retire Donald Trump back to his golden tower or the Kremlin or wherever he's going to go. Once he's in prison, I'm not sure, but it's time for him to go.
Just to be clear on some of the Biden-Harris's ticket, their economic or their climate change policy, they are pro fracking, which is really not a positive thing for people who are, concerned about water quality, who are, really looking forward into renewables. They also are not proponents of specifically the Green New Deal. Joe Biden specifically said that. But he did come up with he has his own climate plan, which is also pretty innovative in and of itself. And in terms of green jobs, he said specifically himself that he was working, that part of what he wants to do is this highway electric car highway charging network thing, which I think is, there's a lot of jobs attached to putting that kind of thing together. So that's also, really important to note. The one last question I have for you, it's very likely that Nancy Pelosi is a consumer of this program. I'm fairly convinced she is watching right now. If you, had her, if she's watching right now, what would you tell her to really hone down this messaging and really get this point across to her constituents across the board?
Oh, Nancy Pelosi doesn't need any help from me. I think that Nancy Pelosi has done very well in serving the people. I think what we really need is an economic stimulus, and we need to restore faith in American government. And I think that in order to do so, we've got to remove the chaotic element. And, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are probably wise to highlight that railroading through a Supreme Court justice after what the Republicans did in 2016 with Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, and not taking up other important priorities, economic priorities, is just a sign of things to come for this administration. And I think continuing to drive that home and to fight for economic stimulus and for a national national COVID-19 strategy will be the priority for the Democrats of this Congress and the next.
I'm going to have to push back on that a little bit. I think that there clearly has been that Pelosi has not pushed back strongly, to use the president's terminology, very strongly on that messaging issue about these COVID-19 relief negotiations. There's a pretty strong talking point that Republicans have pushed that says Democrats are not really, they're not negotiating either. That's just obviously not a factual statement. Democrats have been doing more, but how does she, how does she expand on that to help, improve some of that messaging and really, really get the point across a little more that she is now?
I think that the proof is sort of in the pudding. Most Americans who are experiencing joblessness, who are experiencing the economic effects of COVID-19, understand that the Democrats are trying to get a new stimulus package. How she expands that messaging, I think it's very easy for the Republicans to succeed in their messaging game when they are very much more willing to be dishonest. And we've seen that out of the debates, we've seen that out of the Speaker of the House, Mitch McConnell. And so I think just continuing to drive home the point and let the people who are currently suffering because of this COVID-19, let their voices be heard. Let that be the messaging. And I think that's what the Democrats are trying to do, and that's what they should continue to try to do.
Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Alex, currently joining us from Los Angeles this morning. Thanks so much for taking the time. And that's going to wrap it up for us on American Context Live. If you missed the show, you can catch it on demand. We also have cut some on-demand highlight stuff that you can check out for the instant information. You can also catch us as a podcast later in early next week. Be sure to check out the American Context Substack newsletter, where we talk about some other great reporting on cost of living issues. We will see you next time right here on American Context Live. I'm Andy Hirschfeld in New York. Great.